His cruel mother invited his ex-wife to his wedding, but she showed up with twins and shattered her world. Hi, my graceful, beautiful family. Welcome home to Mr. Peter Stories. Today, I come to you with a heart full of gratitude and eyes full of emotion. Because of you, we've reached 23,000 souls connected by love. This isn't just a number. It's a reflection of your loyalty, your support, and your faith in me. I will never take that for granted. But lately, the love has grown quiet. The likes, the comments, they're fading. Why should I ask for what love used to give freely? If this bond still matters to you, don't let silence be the answer. If your heart still beats with this family, remind us all, I am here. That phrase isn't small, it's proof that real love never leaves. Now please allow me to offer this prayer as a small gift for your enormous hearts. May your life be surrounded by peace, your family guarded by grace, and your journey covered in light. May every worry be replaced with calm, and every step be lifted by love. May you be honored, protected, and never feel unseen in this world. You helped me reach here. You are the reason this voice still speaks, and if you're reading this, say it with pride. I am here. The morning sun painted golden streaks across the silk sheets as Rennie North stirred awake, his arms instinctively tightening around the woman who had become his entire world. Carol Howard lay sleeping beside him, her dark skin glowing like burnished copper in the dawn light, her thick curls spilling across the pillow like a cascade of midnight silk. Even in sleep she was breathtaking, her full lips curved in the hint of a smile, her long lashes casting delicate shadows on her cheeks. Rennie's heart swelled with the same overwhelming love that had captured him 2 years ago when he first saw her at a charity gala. She had been standing alone by the garden doors, wearing a simple emerald dress that made her honey-colored eyes sparkle like precious gems. One look at her radiant smile, one conversation about her dreams of opening a children's literacy center, and Rennie North, a man who had everything money could buy but had never known true love, fell completely and irrevocably under her spell. "Good morning, my beautiful wife," he whispered, pressing soft kisses along her shoulder blade. Carol stirred, turning in his arms with that sleepy smile that made his heart race every single morning. Good morning, handsome," she murmured, her voice still husky with sleep. Her fingers traced the strong line of his jaw, and Rennie caught her hand, pressing a passionate kiss to her palm. "I love you, Carol North," he said, using her married name with the same reverence others might reserve for prayer. "More than the stars love the night sky, more than the ocean loves the shore." Carol's eyes filled with tears of pure joy. Even after 2 years of marriage, Rennie's declarations of love still took her breath away. "And I love you, Rennie North, with every beat of my heart, every breath in my lungs." Their lips met in a kiss that was tender and passionate, a promise renewed with each dawn. Rennie marveled at how Carol fit perfectly in his arms, how her curves molded to his body as if they were two pieces of the same soul. When they finally broke apart, breathless and grinning like teenagers, Carol laughed, that musical sound that never failed to make Rennie's chest tight with emotion. "We should get up," she said half-heartedly, making no move to leave his arms. "Your mother is coming for breakfast, remember?" The mention of his mother caused a slight shadow to cross Rennie's face, though he quickly banished it with another kiss to Carol's forehead. "Let her wait," he murmured. "My wife is more important than breakfast." Carol giggled, the sound like wind chimes in a gentle breeze. "You spoil me terribly, Mr. North." "It's my greatest pleasure in life, Mrs. North," he replied, rolling her beneath him and peppering her face with feather-light kisses until she was laughing and breathless. An hour later, they finally made their way downstairs. Rennie's arm wrapped possessively around Carol's waist. She wore a flowing yellow sundress that made her skin glow, and Rennie couldn't resist stealing another kiss at the bottom of the stairs. "You're insatiable," Carol teased, but her eyes held nothing but love and desire. "Only for you, my darling, only ever for you." They found Charles Sophie North, already seated in the breakfast nook, her silver hair perfectly coiffed, her pale blue eyes taking in every detail of their obvious happiness, with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. At 62, Charles Sophie was still an elegant woman, though there was something cold about her beauty, like a perfectly preserved flower made of ice. "Good morning, Mother," Rennie said warmly, kissing her cheek. "You look lovely as always." "Thank you, darling," Charles Sophie replied, her voice sugar-sweet as her gaze fixed on Carol. "Carol, dear, you look glowing this morning." "Good morning, Mrs. North," Carol said politely, though Rennie noticed the slight tension in her shoulders. His mother had never been openly unkind, but there was something in her tone, her looks, that always made Carol feel like she was being measured and found wanting. "Please call me Mother," Charles Sophie said with that same false smile. "We are family after all." As Carol busied herself preparing breakfast, her way of showing love through nurturing, Rennie watched his two most important women with a contentment that filled his soul. He had everything a man could want: a successful life, a beautiful home, and most importantly, a wife who loved him with a passion that still amazed him daily. "Rennie was just telling me about your plans for the literacy center," Charles Sophie said, as Carol set down a plate of perfectly prepared eggs Benedict. "How ambitious of you. Carol's going to change so many children's lives," Rennie said proudly, reaching for his wife's hand. "She has the most beautiful heart, Mother. These kids will learn to love reading because of her." Carol's cheeks flushed with pleasure at her husband's praise, but Charles Sophie's smile grew even more strained. "Yes, well, charity work can be so time-consuming. I do hope it won't interfere with your duties as Rennie's wife." The subtle barb hit its mark and Carol's smile faltered slightly. Rennie, oblivious to the undercurrent, squeezed his wife's hand reassuringly. "Carol manages everything beautifully," he said. "I'm the luckiest man alive to have such an incredible wife." After breakfast, Rennie reluctantly left for a brief meeting, kissing Carol with such passion that she was still blushing when he pulled away. "I'll be back in 2 hours," he promised. "We'll spend the afternoon in the garden, just the two of us." "I'll be waiting," Carol whispered against his lips. The moment Rennie's car disappeared down the driveway, Charles Sophie's mask slipped slightly. She watched Carol collecting the breakfast dishes with calculating eyes, her fingers drumming against the table in a rhythm that spoke of barely contained malice. "You know, dear," she said in a tone that was honey over poison, "I've been thinking about your little literacy project." Carol looked up hopefully. "Oh? Yes, and I have to wonder, is it wise to spread yourself so thin? Rennie needs a wife who can focus entirely on him, on building the proper kind of life he deserves." The words were carefully chosen, designed to plant seeds of doubt. Carol felt a familiar twist in her stomach, the same feeling she got whenever she was alone with her mother-in-law. "I think Rennie supports my dreams," Carol said quietly. "Of course he does, dear. He's too kind-hearted for his own good sometimes." Charles Sophie's smile was sharp as a blade. "But kindness can be a weakness, don't you think? And a man like Rennie, well, he needs a certain type of wife. Someone who understands his world." Carol's hands stilled on the dishes. "What do you mean?" "Oh, nothing specific," Charles Sophie said airily, rising from her chair with the grace of a predator. "Just that love isn't always enough, is it? There are expectations, standards, legacy to consider." With that poisonous seed planted, Charles Sophie gathered her purse and glided toward the door, leaving Carol standing alone in the kitchen, her heart suddenly heavy with unnamed fears. When Rennie returned 2 hours later, he found Carol in there, garden tending to the roses with unusual intensity. She looked up at his approach, and her face immediately brightened, the shadows in her eyes disappearing like morning mist. "Welcome home," she said, rising to meet him. Rennie swept her into his arms, spinning her around until she was laughing and breathless. "God, I missed you," he said against her neck. 2 hours felt like 2 lifetimes. As they slow danced among the roses to music only they could hear, Carol pushed her mother-in-law's words from her mind. This was real. Rennie's love, his devotion, the way he looked at her like she was his entire universe. Nothing else mattered, but somewhere in the grand house behind them, the seeds of destruction had already been planted, waiting for the right moment to bloom into something that would shatter their perfect love. For now, though, there was only Rennie and Carol, dancing in their garden, completely lost in a love so pure and powerful that it seemed nothing could ever tear them apart. They had no idea how wrong they were. Chapter 2. The Mother's Deception. 3 weeks had passed since that first breakfast, and Charles Sophie's visits had become a daily ritual. She would arrive each morning with that perfect smile, always bringing fresh flowers or pastries, playing the role of the devoted mother-in-law to perfection. But Carol was beginning to notice things, small, inexplicable incidents that made her question her own sanity. The love letters she wrote to Rennie and left on his pillow would mysteriously disappear. The roses she carefully cut from their garden for the dining room table would be found withered and brown by evening, as if someone had deliberately destroyed them. The romantic dinners she spent hours preparing would somehow go wrong. Salt instead of sugar in the dessert, the candles mysteriously blown out, the wine bottle somehow knocked over, staining the white tablecloth crimson. Carol stood in their bedroom, holding the latest love letter she had written to her husband. Her handwriting flowed across the pale pink paper. "My dearest Rennie, every morning I wake up in your arms feels like the first day of forever. Your love is the sunshine that makes my soul bloom like the roses in our garden." She placed it carefully on his pillow, smoothing out the edges with tender fingers. This time, she told herself, this time it would reach him. Downstairs, she could hear Charles Sophie's voice drifting up from the kitchen, that artificially sweet tone that made Carol's skin crawl. The older woman had arrived an hour ago, ostensibly, to help with the household arrangements. But Carol knew better now. She was watching, waiting, looking for opportunities to undermine and destroy. "Carol, darling," Charles Sophie's voice called from below. "Could you come down here, please? I need your help with something." Carol's stomach clenched with familiar dread, but she couldn't refuse without seeming rude. She made her way downstairs to find Charles Sophie standing by the kitchen island, her pale blue eyes gleaming with something that wasn't quite kindness. "I was just thinking," Charles Sophie began, her voice dripping with false concern, "about your little literacy project. Have you given any more thought to what I said? About priorities?" Yes, I've thought about it," Carol said carefully. She had spent countless sleepless nights wondering if Charles Sophie was right, if she was being selfish by pursuing her own dreams. "Good, because I care about you, dear. I care about both of you." Charles Sophie moved closer, her presence somehow making the spacious kitchen feel suffocating. "You know, Rennie's father and I had such a solid marriage because I understood my role. I never let outside distractions interfere with what was truly important, being the perfect wife to a successful man." Carol's hands twisted together nervously. "But Rennie supports my work." "Of course he does, sweet child. He's too kind to say otherwise." Charles Sophie's voice dropped to a whisper, intimate and poisonous. "But kindness can be mistaken for weakness, can't it? And successful men like Rennie, they need strength. They need wives who complement their status, not complicate it." The words hit Carol like physical blows, each one carefully calculated to wound. She felt tears prick at her eyes, hating herself for being so sensitive, so easily hurt. "I should go prepare lunch," Carol managed, turning away. "Carol." Charles Sophie's voice stopped her cold. "There's something else. Something I probably shouldn't say, but I care too much about this family to stay silent." Carol turned back reluctantly, dreading what would come next. "I've been getting calls," Charles Sophie said, her expression full of manufactured sorrow, "from some of Rennie's business associates. They've been asking questions about you, about your background." "What kind of questions?" Carol's voice was barely a whisper. "Oh, you know how people can be, especially in our social circle." Charles Sophie's eyes glittered with malicious satisfaction. "They wonder if you truly understand the responsibilities that come with being Mrs. Rennie North. They worry about compatibility, long-term stability." Each word was a dagger, expertly placed to cause maximum damage. Carol felt the room spinning slightly, her breath coming in shallow gasps. "I'm sure it's just idle gossip," Charles Sophie continued with false reassurance. "But perception is everything in our world, isn't it? And once people start talking..." The sound of Rennie's car in the driveway saved Carol from having to respond. She heard the front door open, followed by his familiar footsteps and the warm sound of his voice calling out, "Where are my two favorite ladies?" Instantly, Charles Sophie's entire demeanor transformed. The cold predator vanished, replaced by the picture-perfect mother with sparkling eyes and a genuine smile. "We're in the kitchen, darling," she called back sweetly. "Carol and I were just having the most wonderful chat about her projects." Rennie appeared in the doorway, his face lighting up at the sight of his wife. He crossed to Carol immediately, wrapping her in his arms and pressing a passionate kiss to her lips that made her toes curl despite her emotional turmoil. "Hello, beautiful," he murmured against her lips. "I missed you every second I was gone." "Missed you too," Carol whispered, clinging to him like an anchor in a storm. "And how's my favorite mother?" Rennie asked, releasing Carol to kiss Charles Sophie's cheek affectionately. "Perfect, now that my son is home," she replied, her voice full of maternal warmth. "Carol and I were just discussing how blessed you both are to have found each other." Carol stared at her mother-in-law in shock. The transformation was so complete, so convincing, that for a moment Carol wondered if she had imagined the cruel conversation just moments before. "We are blessed," Rennie agreed, pulling Carol back against his side. "I tell Carol every day that she's an angel sent just for me." "And you tell me I'm the luckiest woman alive," Carol added softly, finding strength in their familiar exchange. "Because you are," Rennie said firmly. "Both of you are the most important people in my world." That evening, after Charles Sophie had left with promises to return tomorrow, Carol sat in their bedroom, staring at Rennie's pillow. The love letter was gone. Again. "Darling?" Rennie's voice came from the bathroom where he was brushing his teeth. "Did you leave something for me? I thought I saw a piece of paper on my pillow earlier, but when I looked again, it was gone." Carol's heart leaped. He had seen it. That meant someone had taken it after he'd noticed it was there. Yes, I wrote you a letter," she said carefully. "You didn't find it?" Rennie emerged from the bathroom, his face full of confusion and disappointment. "No, sweetheart, I looked everywhere. Are you sure you left it there?" The doubt in his voice, however slight, felt like another wound. Carol forced a smile. "I must have forgotten. It wasn't important anyway." But as Rennie gathered her in his arms for their nightly ritual of whispered endearments and passionate kisses, Carol's mind raced. Someone had taken her letter. Someone wanted to keep her words of love from reaching her husband. The next morning brought fresh horrors. The roses Carol had cut for the breakfast table lay scattered on the floor, their petals blackened as if burned. The romantic dinner she had spent hours preparing the night before had been ruined when somehow salt had been substituted for sugar in the chocolate mousse, making Rennie's face pucker with disappointment. "I'm so sorry," Carol had whispered, her cheeks burning with shame. "It's okay, my love," Rennie had assured her, though she could see the confusion in his eyes. Accidents happen, but they weren't accidents. Carol was beginning to understand that much. Someone was systematically destroying every romantic gesture she made, every expression of love she offered her husband. When Charles Sophie arrived that morning, her eyes went immediately to the scattered rose petals that Carol was cleaning up. "Oh, my," she said with false sympathy. "Another accident, dear?" "Yes," Carol said quietly, not trusting herself to say more. "You know," Charles Sophie said, settling into a chair and watching Carol work, "Rennie mentioned that dinner didn't go as planned last night. He's not upset, of course. He's too good-hearted for that. But I could see the disappointment in his eyes." "It was just a mistake," Carol said, her voice growing smaller. "Of course it was. But you know what they say about patterns." Charles Sophie's voice was silk over steel. "When things keep going wrong, people start to wonder. They start to question whether someone is really suitable." That afternoon, when Rennie found Carol crying in their garden, she tried to tell him. Through her tears, she spoke of feeling watched, of things disappearing, of his mother's cruel words when they were alone. But Rennie saw only his beloved wife in distress, and his elderly mother who had raised him with such devotion and sacrifice. "Sweetheart," he said gently, gathering Carol in his arms, "Mother loves you. She tells me every day how happy she is that I found you. Maybe you're just stressed about the literacy center. Maybe you're imagining things that aren't there." The gentle doubt in his voice shattered something inside Carol's chest. Even Rennie, her Rennie who loved her more than life itself, was beginning to question her sanity. As she sobbed against his chest, Carol didn't notice Charles Sophie watching from the kitchen window, her lips curved in a smile of pure malevolent satisfaction. The web was working. Soon, very soon, Carol Howard North would be nothing but a painful memory, and Charles Sophie would have her son back where he belonged, under her complete control. The destruction of their perfect love had begun, in earnest. Chapter 3. The Trap is Set. Carol stared at the small white stick in her trembling hands, her heart pounding so hard she could hear it echoing in her ears. 2 pink lines, clear, unmistakable, beautiful pink lines that confirmed what her soul had whispered to her for the past week. She was pregnant. "Oh my God," she breathed, sinking onto the marble edge of their bathroom counter. "Oh my God, Rennie, we're going to have a baby." Tears of pure joy streamed down her cheeks as she pressed the test to her chest, holding this precious moment close to her heart. After 2 years of marriage, after countless nights of whispered dreams about little feet running through their garden and tiny hands reaching for Daddy's face, it was finally happening. The appointment with Dr. Martinez that afternoon only amplified her euphoria. Not only was she pregnant, but the ultrasound revealed the most incredible surprise of all. "Congratulations, Mrs. North," Dr. Martinez said with a warm smile, pointing to the fuzzy black and white image on the screen. "You're carrying twins, 2 healthy baby boys." Carol's hand flew to her mouth, muffling a sob of overwhelming happiness. "Twins, really? 2 babies?" "2 beautiful babies," the doctor confirmed. "Based on the measurements, you're about 8 weeks along. Everything looks perfect. Twin boys, Rennie's sons, their sons." Carol floated through the rest of the day in a haze of blissful disbelief, her hands constantly drifting to her still flat stomach, where 2 tiny miracles were growing. She couldn't wait to see Rennie's face when she told him. He would be over the moon. He'd always talked about wanting children, about teaching them to play football in the backyard and reading them bedtime stories. Tonight would be perfect. She would create the most romantic evening of their lives, and then she would give him the most beautiful gift she could ever offer: the news that they were going to be parents. Carol spent the afternoon in a frenzy of loving preparation. She drove to the florist and bought dozens of white roses, Rennie's favorites, and scattered the petals throughout their bedroom and down the hallway leading to their special place. She ordered dinner from the French restaurant, where they'd had their first date, complete with the champagne they'd shared that magical night. Well, sparkling grape juice for her now, but Rennie wouldn't know that until she told him why. In their walk-in closet, she selected the emerald silk dress she'd worn to their wedding reception, the one that made Rennie's eyes darken with desire and love. She wanted to look perfect for this moment, wanted everything to be exactly right when she changed their lives forever. The final touch was the music. Their wedding song, At Last, by Etta James, would be playing softly when he walked through the door. She could already imagine his expression, the way his eyes would light up with confusion and then understanding as she led him to their bedroom, where she'd placed the ultrasound picture in a silver frame on his pillow. By 6 o'clock, everything was perfect. Candles flickered throughout the house, casting everything in a warm, romantic glow. The rose petals created a pathway from the front door to their bedroom, and the table was set with their finest china and crystal. Carol herself was radiant in her emerald dress, her hair flowing in soft waves over her shoulders, her skin glowing with the secret joy of new life. She checked her phone. Rennie had texted that he would be home by 7, earlier than usual, because he wanted to surprise her with a romantic evening. If only he knew that she had her own surprise planned, one that would make his pale in comparison. At exactly 10 minutes to 7, Carol heard the unmistakable sound of heels clicking on the marble entryway. Her heart sank slightly. Charles Sophie. She had hoped to have this evening alone with Rennie, but his mother had a key and often dropped by unannounced. "Carol, darling?" Charles Sophie's voice rang out, sickeningly sweet as always. "Are you home?" Carol reluctantly left the bedroom, where she'd been making final adjustments to the romantic scene. "I'm here, Mrs. North, but I'm afraid tonight isn't a good time for—" She stopped mid-sentence as she reached the top of the stairs. Charles Sophie wasn't alone. A tall, distinguished man with silver hair and kind eyes stood beside her, looking somewhat uncomfortable in his expensive suit. "Carol, I'd like you to meet my old friend, Richard Pemberton," Charles Sophie said with that smile that never quite reached her eyes. "Richard, this is my daughter-in-law, Carol." "Pleased to meet you," Richard said politely, though his eyes held confusion. "I'm sorry to intrude. Charles Sophie insisted I come in, but I told her I could wait in the car." "Nonsense!" Charles Sophie interrupted, her grip tight on Richard's arm. "Carol doesn't mind, do you, dear? Richard is an old family friend, and he's going through such a difficult divorce. I thought a home-cooked meal and some friendly conversation might cheer him up." Carol's heart sank. This was supposed to be her special night, the night she told Rennie about their babies. But she couldn't turn away someone who was suffering, especially not in front of Charles Sophie, who would undoubtedly report any unkindness to Rennie. "Of course not," Carol said, though her voice lacked enthusiasm. "You're welcome to stay for dinner, Mr. Pemberton." "Actually," Charles Sophie said, her eyes gleaming with something that made Carol's skin crawl, "I was thinking Richard could wait in the guest room upstairs while I help you with dinner preparations. He's had such a long day and he could use some quiet time to rest." Something about the suggestion felt wrong, but Carol couldn't put her finger on why. I suppose that would be fine. The guest room is the second door on the right." Richard nodded gratefully and made his way upstairs, leaving Carol alone with Charles Sophie. The older woman's demeanor immediately shifted, her false warmth evaporating like morning mist. "How thoughtful of you to be so accommodating," Charles Sophie said, her voice dripping with false praise. "I do hope Rennie appreciates how welcoming you are to his mother's friends." "Of course he does," Carol said uncertainly. "But I should mention that tonight is rather special. "Oh yes, I can see you've gone to quite a bit of trouble," Charles Sophie interrupted, her eyes taking in the rose petals and candles with something like disgust. "How romantic! I hope you won't mind if Richard and I interrupt your little evening. After all, family obligations should come first, shouldn't they?" The barb hit its mark, and Carol felt her confidence wavering. "Yes, of course, family first. Good. Now, why don't you go check on Richard? Make sure he's comfortable in the guest room. I'll just tidy up down here a bit." Carol climbed the stairs slowly, her earlier excitement dampened by confusion and unease. She knocked softly on the guest room door. "Mr. Pemberton, is everything all right? Do you need anything?" "I'm fine, thank you," came his muffled reply. "And please, call me Richard. I really do appreciate your hospitality, Mrs. North." "I hope I'm not imposing on your evening." "Not at all," Carol lied. "Take all the time you need." As she turned to go back downstairs, she heard Charles Sophie's voice from the guest room, sharp and urgent. Carol paused, straining to listen. "Told you this is important," Charles Sophie was saying. "Just stay in here, and when Rennie arrives, don't come out no matter what you hear. Do you understand me?" "Charles Sophie, I don't understand what..." Richard's voice was confused and uncomfortable. "Just trust me. This is for Rennie's own good." Carol frowned, her unease growing into genuine alarm. What was Charles Sophie planning, and why did she sound so calculating? At that moment, she heard the familiar sound of Rennie's car in the driveway. Her heart leaped despite her confusion. He was home early, just as he'd promised. Maybe she could still salvage their romantic evening, still find a way to share her beautiful news. She hurried downstairs, expecting to find Charles Sophie in the kitchen or living room. Instead, she found the house seemingly empty, the candles still flickering, the rose petals undisturbed. "Charles Sophie," she called out, "where are you?" The front door opened, and Rennie walked in, his face already lighting up at the sight of the romantic preparations. "Carol, sweetheart, what's all this? It's beautiful." His words were cut off by a sudden piercing scream from upstairs. A woman's scream, full of terror and outrage. "Help! Somebody help me!" Charles Sophie's voice, desperate and frightened, echoed through the house. Rennie's face went white with alarm as he bolted for the stairs, taking them 3 at a time. Carol followed, her heart pounding with dread and confusion. They reached the guest room just as the door burst open. Charles Sophie stumbled out, her hair disheveled, her blouse torn at the shoulder, tears streaming down her face. "Rennie," she sobbed, throwing herself into her son's arms. "Thank God you're home." "Mother, what happened? What's wrong?" Rennie's voice was sharp with concern and rising anger. It was... Charles Sophie gestured toward the guest room, her whole body shaking. That man Richard, he attacked me. He said Carol invited him here, that she told him I would be available." Carol felt the world tilt on its axis. "What? No, that's not. I never said anything like that. She locked us in there together." Charles Sophie wailed, pointing an accusing finger at Carol. "She said she was giving me a gift and that you would never know. She planned this whole thing." "That's not true." Carol's voice cracked with desperation. "Rennie, you have to believe me. She brought him here. I was preparing a romantic evening for us because I have something wonderful to tell you." "Where is he?" Rennie's voice was deadly quiet, his eyes dark with a fury Carol had never seen before. As if summoned by the question, Richard appeared in the doorway, his face a mask of confusion and distress. "I'm so sorry," he said, his voice shaking. "I never meant for this to happen. Charles Sophie, I thought you said Carol wanted to, but when I tried to explain that I wasn't interested, you started screaming." "He's lying," Charles Sophie sobbed, harder. "Carol set this whole thing up. She wanted to frame me, to make me look bad so you'd choose her over your own mother." Carol stared at her mother-in-law in horror, finally seeing the full scope of the evil plot that had been carefully orchestrated. The romantic evening, the early arrival, the convenient witness. It had all been planned to destroy her marriage in one devastating blow. "Rennie!" she whispered, reaching for her husband with trembling hands. "Please, you have to listen to me. I would never—" But when she looked into Rennie's eyes, she saw that the damage was already done. The seeds of doubt his mother had been planting for months had finally borne their poisonous fruit. The romantic evening Carol had planned to announce their miracle was ending in the destruction of everything she held dear. And somewhere in her broken heart, she realized that the ultrasound picture still lay waiting on their bedroom pillow, a gift of love that would now never be received. The trap had been perfectly set, and Carol had walked right into it. Chapter 4. The Shattered Dream. The silence that followed Charles Sophie's accusation was deafening, broken only by her carefully orchestrated sobs and the thundering of Carol's heart in her ears. Rennie stood frozen in the hallway, his face cycling through emotions like a man, watching his world collapse in slow motion, confusion, disbelief, and then, most devastating of all, a cold fury that transformed his beloved features into those of a stranger. "Get out," he said quietly to Richard, his voice deadly calm. "Get out of my house, now." Richard Pemberton, clearly realizing he had been used as a pawn in something far more sinister than he'd understood, stammered apologies as he gathered his coat and fled down the stairs. The front door slammed behind him, leaving the three of them alone in the wreckage of what should have been the most beautiful night of Carol's life. "Rennie," Carol whispered, her voice breaking on his name. "Please, let me explain. This isn't what it looks like. Isn't what it looks like." Rennie's voice rose, the first crack in his controlled demeanor. "My mother is standing here traumatized, telling me that my wife orchestrated some sick setup, and you want to tell me it's not what it looks like? Because it's not." Carol's voice rose to match his, desperation making her bold. "Rennie, listen to me, really listen. When have I ever given you reason to doubt me? When have I ever been anything but devoted to you, to our marriage?" Charles Sophie let out a fresh wail, burying her face in her son's shoulder. "I'm so sorry, Rennie. I should have told you earlier about my concerns. The way she looks at other men, the comments she makes when you're not around. That's a lie." Carol's scream of outrage echoed through the hall. "I have never looked at another man. I have never said anything inappropriate. Rennie, you know me. You know my heart." But as Carol looked into her husband's eyes, she saw the poison finally taking full effect. Every seed of doubt his mother had planted over the months was blooming into a garden of suspicion and betrayal. The man who had once trusted her completely, who had built their entire relationship on faith and love, was looking at her as if she were a stranger. "Do I?" Rennie asked, his voice turning cold as winter steel. "Because the woman I married would never humiliate my mother this way. The woman I married would never hurt the people I love most." Each word was a physical blow, and Carol felt her knees buckle slightly. She reached out instinctively, one hand going to her stomach where their precious babies grew, the other stretching toward the husband who was slipping away from her like sand through her fingers. "Rennie, please," she begged, tears streaming down her face. "Remember our wedding day. Remember this morning when you told me you loved me more than the stars loved the night sky. Remember the man who promised to protect me forever. The man who married a lie." Rennie cut her off, his voice harsh with pain and betrayal. "How long has this been going on, Carol? How long have you been playing games behind my back while I've been telling the world how perfect you are?" "Never." Carol's voice cracked with the force of her denial. "I have never betrayed you, not even in thought. I love you with every breath in my body, with every beat of my heart. Stop." Rennie held up a hand, his face twisting with disgust. "Just stop with the lies. I can't stand to hear any more lies." Carol felt something shatter inside her chest, as if her heart was actually breaking into physical pieces. The ultrasound picture upstairs seemed to call to her. The news of their twin boys burning on her tongue like a secret too precious and now too painful to share. "Rennie," she whispered one more time, her voice barely audible. "There's something I need to tell you, something important." "The only thing I need to hear from you," Rennie said, his voice like ice, "is an explanation for what happened here tonight. And don't insult my intelligence with more lies." Charles Sophie lifted her head from Rennie's shoulder, her eyes meeting Carol's with a flash of pure, malevolent triumph. In that instant, Carol saw the truth clearly. This had all been planned, every detail orchestrated to destroy her marriage at the moment of its greatest potential joy. "I can't," Carol whispered, her hand still pressed protectively over her stomach. "I can't explain something that didn't happen the way she's telling you." "Then, we're done here." Rennie's words fell like a death sentence. "We're done." "What do you mean, we're done?" Carol's voice rose in panic. "Rennie, you can't mean... I can't look at you right now without feeling sick," he said, and each word was a knife through her heart. I can't stand to be in the same room with someone who would hurt my mother and then lie to my face about it." "I'm your wife," Carol screamed through her tears. "I'm the woman you love. How can you throw that away based on lies?" "You're the woman I thought I loved," Rennie corrected coldly. "But I don't know who you really are anymore." Carol stumbled backward as if he'd struck her, her hand clutching the banister for support. "So that's it? 2 years of marriage, 2 years of love and devotion and happiness, and you're throwing it all away?" "You threw it away the moment you decided to humiliate my family." The finality in his voice broke something fundamental inside Carol. She looked at this man she loved more than life itself, this man whose children were growing inside her body, and saw only a stranger driven by doubt and manipulation. "Fine," she whispered, her voice hollow with defeat. "If that's what you believe, if that's who you think I am, then you're right. We are done." She turned and walked toward their bedroom on shaking legs, her mind numb with shock and devastation. Behind her, she could hear Charles Sophie's continued sobs and Rennie's voice gentle and comforting as he soothed his mother's manufactured trauma. In their bedroom, their sanctuary, their haven of love, Carol stared at the romantic scene she had so carefully prepared. The candles still flickered, casting dancing shadows on the walls. The rose petals still created a pathway of love and hope. And there, on Rennie's pillow, lay the ultrasound picture in its silver frame, the 2 tiny forms that would have been his greatest joy and pride. Carol picked up the frame with trembling fingers, pressing it to her chest as sobs racked her body. "I'm so sorry, my babies," she whispered to the life growing inside her. "I'm so sorry Daddy will never know how much he would have loved you." She couldn't tell him now. How could she? How could she share the news of their children with a man who looked at her with such disgust and betrayal? How could she bring babies into a marriage that was crumbling beneath her feet? The sound of car doors slamming outside drew her to the window. A black sedan sat in their driveway, and a man in a suit was walking toward their front door, carrying an envelope. Even through her emotional haze, Carol knew what that envelope contained. She heard the doorbell ring, heard Rennie's heavy footsteps. On the stairs, heard the murmur of voices at the front door. When the footsteps returned, they paused outside their bedroom door. "Carol," Rennie's voice was flat, emotionless. "Open the door." With wooden movements, Carol opened the door to find her husband holding a manila envelope. His face was stone, his eyes cold and distant. "Divorce papers," he said simply, holding out the envelope. "I called my lawyer before I came home tonight. I wanted to surprise you with a romantic evening, but I guess we both had surprises planned." Carol stared at the envelope as if it were a venomous snake. "You had these prepared before you even came home? Before you even heard what happened?" For just a moment, something flickered in Rennie's eyes. Confusion, perhaps even doubt. But then his jaw hardened again. "I've been having doubts for weeks. The way things have been going wrong, the way Mother's been so upset. I think we both know this marriage was a mistake." Carol took the envelope with numb fingers, her heart dying a little more with each word. "A mistake," she repeated hollowly. "Our love was a mistake." "It wasn't love," Rennie said, and his voice broke slightly on the words. "It was infatuation. It was me being blinded by a beautiful face and forgetting about the things that really matter." Carol closed her eyes, feeling the last of her hope drain away. When she opened them again, her face was calm, almost serene with acceptance. "I'll be gone by morning," she said quietly. "Carol, no." She held up a hand, stopping whatever he might have said. "You've made your choice. You've chosen to believe lies over love, suspicion over trust. There's nothing left to say." She closed the door gently in his face and leaned against it, listening to his footsteps retreat down the hall. Outside, thunder rumbled ominously, and the first drops of rain began to patter against the windows. Carol packed with mechanical precision, folding her clothes and placing them in suitcases, while tears streamed silently down her face. She left behind the designer dresses, the expensive jewelry, all the trappings of her life as Mrs. Rennie North. She took only the essentials, and most importantly, the ultrasound picture that would be the only proof her children would ever have, that they were wanted and loved, even if only by their mother. As she prepared to leave the only home she had ever truly known, Carol placed a single letter on the dresser. Not a love letter this time, but a goodbye. In it, she told Rennie that she was pregnant, that he had twin sons he would never know, and that someday, when those boys asked about their father, she would tell them that he was a good man who lost his way. But as she sealed the envelope and left it propped against his mirror, Carol had no way of knowing that Charles Sophie would find it first, destroying it before Rennie ever knew it existed. At 2 a.m., as storm clouds gathered overhead and rain lashed against the windows, Carol Howard North walked out of her fairy tale life and into an uncertain future, carrying the secret of her husband's children and the shattered remains of a love that had once seemed strong enough to conquer anything. Behind her, the house stood silent and cold. The candles finally burned out, the rose petals scattered and forgotten, much like the dreams they had once represented. Chapter 5. 8 years of separation. Sydney, Australia. 8 years later. The late afternoon sun streamed through the windows of the cozy cottage overlooking Bondi Beach as Carol Howard sat cross-legged on the living room floor, helping her 8-year-old twin sons with their homework. The years had been kind to her in some ways. She was still beautiful, still possessed of that gentle grace that had first captured Rennie's heart. But there was something different in her eyes now. A quiet strength born of surviving heartbreak, a protective wariness that hadn't been there in her fairy tale days as Mrs. North. "Mummy, I can't remember how to carry the one," complained Ryan, his small face scrunched in concentration as he wrestled with a particularly challenging math problem. His dark hair fell across his forehead in exactly the same way his father's always had, and his deep blue eyes, Rennie's eyes, sparkled with frustration. "Here, sweetheart, let me show you," Carol said softly, moving to kneel beside her son. As she guided his small hand with the pencil, her heart did what it always did when she looked at Ryan and his twin brother Riley. It broke and healed simultaneously, the bitter and the sweet, intertwined so completely she could no longer separate them. Both boys were living photographs of their father. Ryan had inherited Rennie's contemplative nature and his way of tilting his head when he was thinking deeply. Riley, just 10 minutes younger but already showing signs of being the more adventurous twin, had Rennie's charming smile and his habit of running his fingers through his hair when he was excited. Every day, Carol saw the man she had loved more than life itself reflected in these two precious faces, and every day the sight made her heart ache with longing and loss. "There you go," she said, as Ryan finally grasped the concept, his face lighting up with the same triumphant joy she had seen on Rennie's face 1,000 times. "You're so smart, my darling boy." "Mummy, when we finish our homework, can you tell us the story about the prince again?" Riley asked from his spot at the coffee table, where he was carefully coloring a picture of a family. A mother, father, and 2 little boys, all holding hands under a rainbow. Carol's throat tightened. The story, the bedtime tale she had been telling them for years about a prince who lived in a faraway land, who had once loved their mother very much, but had lost his way in a dark forest of lies and deception. She always ended it the same way, with the hope that someday, somehow, the prince would find his path back to them. "Of course I can," she whispered, pressing a kiss to Riley's dark head. "After dinner." As the boys returned to their homework, Carol moved to the kitchen to prepare their evening meal, her mind drifting, as it so often did, to the life she had left behind. The cottage was small but comfortable, decorated with the boys' artwork and photos of their adventures exploring Australia. She had built a good life here, a consulting business that allowed her to work from home, close friends who had become like family, a community that embraced her and her sons without question. But despite all the healing and growth, despite the joy her children brought her every single day, there was still a Rennie-shaped hole in her heart that nothing could fill. She had tried dating a few times over the years, kind men who were patient with her boys and gentle with her guarded heart, but none of them could even come close to touching the place where Rennie lived. He had been her great love, her soul mate, and even though he had shattered her heart beyond repair, she couldn't seem to let go of the memory of what they had shared. "Mummy," Ryan's voice interrupted her thoughts. "Do you think our daddy ever thinks about us?" The question hit her like a physical blow, as it always did. Both boys knew they had a father who lived far away, who didn't know about them because of complicated grown-up problems. Carol had tried to answer their questions honestly, without burdening them with the painful truth that their father had thrown away their family based on lies, that he had chosen to believe the worst of their mother instead of trusting in their love. "I think," Carol said carefully, "that if your daddy knew about you, he would love you more than all the stars in the sky." "Then why doesn't he know about us?" Riley asked, his blue eyes, so heartbreakingly like Rennie's, filled with the innocent confusion of a child trying to understand adult pain. "Sometimes grown-ups make mistakes," Carol said, gathering both boys in her arms. "Sometimes they believe the wrong things, or they let fear make their choices for them. But that doesn't mean they don't have love in their hearts. Will he ever come find us?" Ryan asked softly. Carol closed her eyes, breathing in the sweet scent of her son's hair, letting their warm little bodies chase away the chill that always came with thoughts of Rennie. "I don't know, my darlings, but I know that you are loved, so very much loved, and that will always be enough." Meanwhile, in New York, 3,000 miles away, Rennie North sat in his penthouse office overlooking Manhattan, staring out at the city lights without really seeing them. The successful businessman that everyone saw, the man who had built an empire, who commanded respect and admiration from his peers, was nothing more than an empty shell going through the motions of living. 8 years had passed since Carol left, and not a single day had gone by that he didn't think about her. He woke up reaching for her, went to sleep aching for the sound of her laughter, spent countless hours wondering where she was and whether she had found happiness with someone else. The thought of another man holding her, loving her, raising children with her was enough to drive him to madness on his darker days. He had tried to move on. God knew he had tried. There had been women, beautiful, accomplished women, who would have made suitable wives for a man of his position. But none of them had Carol's warmth, her gentle spirit, her way of making him feel like he could conquer the world simply because she believed in him. None of them could make him forget the look in Carol's eyes the night he handed her those divorce papers. The devastation, the betrayal, the way she had seemed to shrink into herself as if he had physically struck her. In his quieter moments, when the noise of business and obligation couldn't drown out the voice of his conscience, Rennie wondered if he had made the biggest mistake of his life. "Rennie, darling," the voice of Elena Hartwell broke through his brooding thoughts. She glided into his office without knocking, her platinum blonde hair perfectly styled, her designer dress accentuating her tall, willowy frame. Elena was everything his mother had ever wanted in a daughter-in-law. Wealthy, well-connected, from the right kind of family, she was also as cold as a winter morning, her smiles calculated and her affections conditional. "Elena," he said politely, rising from his chair out of ingrained courtesy, "I wasn't expecting you." "Your mother called," Elena said, settling herself into the chair across from his desk with practiced elegance. "She's concerned about you. You've been declining all the social invitations, and you barely touched your dinner at the Hamptons last weekend." Rennie suppressed a sigh. His mother. Charles Sophie had gotten her way in the end. Carol was gone, disappeared without a trace, despite the private investigators he had hired in moments of weakness to find her. And now his mother was pushing him toward Eleanor with the same relentless determination she had once used to destroy his marriage. "I've been busy with work," Rennie said, the same excuse he had been using for months to avoid the social obligations that came with his position. "You can't work forever, darling," Elena said, her tone patient but with an edge of steel underneath. "A man in your position needs a wife, someone who understands the responsibilities that come with your success." The words echoed something his mother had said years ago, something about Carol not understanding those responsibilities. Rennie felt the familiar twist of pain in his chest as he remembered Carol's dreams of the literacy center, her gentle ambitions to help children, her complete disinterest in the social climbing that seemed to consume everyone else in his world. "Perhaps," he said non-committally. Elena smiled, the expression never quite reaching her gray eyes. "I'm glad you're finally being sensible about this. Your mother and I have been discussing arrangements, and we think a spring wedding would be perfect. Small, but elegant, just family and close friends." "Elena, I know it seems sudden," she continued as if he hadn't spoken, "but we've known each other for 3 years now. We're compatible, we move in the same circles, and frankly, neither of us is getting any younger. It's time to be practical about these things." Practical. Rennie almost laughed at the irony. There had been nothing practical about his love for Carol, nothing sensible or calculated. It had been pure feeling, pure passion, pure joy. Being with Carol had made him feel alive in a way he hadn't experienced before or since. "I need more time," he said quietly. Elena's smile tightened slightly. "How much more time, darling? We're not children anymore. This isn't about grand passion or fairy tale romance. This is about building a life with someone suitable. Suitable. Not beloved, not cherished, not adored, just suitable." "I'll think about it," Rennie said, which they both knew was not a yes. After Elena left with promises to call him tomorrow, Rennie returned to his window and the glittering city beyond. Somewhere out there, in a world he couldn't reach, Carol was living her life without him. Did she ever think of him? Did she ever wonder what might have been if he had trusted in their love instead of his mother's poisonous whispers? The questions haunted him as they did every night, following him home to his empty penthouse, where Carol's laughter no longer echoed through the rooms, where no one waited to greet him with passionate kisses and stories about her day. He was surrounded by luxury and success, courted by one of New York's most eligible women, heir to his mother's approval and society's admiration, and he had never been more miserable in his life. In his bedroom, Rennie opened the drawer of his nightstand and pulled out the one thing he had kept from his marriage, A photograph of Carol, laughing in their garden, her face turned up to the sun, joy radiating from every line of her body. He had taken it one lazy Sunday morning when she was picking roses for their breakfast table, and it captured everything he had loved about her: her warmth, her light, her incredible capacity for happiness. "I'm sorry," he whispered to the photograph as he did every night. "I'm so sorry, my beautiful Carol." But apologies couldn't cross oceans or heal the wounds that 8 years had carved in both their hearts. And as Rennie finally fell into another restless sleep 3,000 miles away, Carol was tucking 2 little boys into bed and whispering the same bedtime prayer she had said every night for 8 years: that someday, somehow, love would find a way to bring their family home. Chapter 6. The Wedding Invitation. The morning arrived with the kind of brilliant sunshine that made Sydney's harbour sparkle like scattered diamonds. Carol was in her small kitchen, preparing breakfast for the twins while they got ready for school, when she heard the soft thud of mail being delivered through the slot in her front door. "Mummy, I can't find my math book," Riley called from upstairs, his voice carrying the slight panic of an 8-year-old who feared being late for school. "Check under your bed, sweetheart," Carol called back, wiping her hands on a dish towel as she walked toward the front door. "And Brian, don't forget to brush your teeth." "Already did," came the cheerful response from the bathroom. Carol smiled despite the familiar morning chaos. These small, precious moments of domestic life had become her anchor over the past 80 years. The gentle rhythm of raising her boys, the sweet chaos of their childhood, the way they filled every corner of her heart with light, even on the darkest days. She bent to gather the small stack of mail from the floor, expecting the usual bills and advertisements. But there, nestled between an electric bill and a flyer for the local grocery store, was an envelope that made her blood run cold. Thick, cream-colored paper, elegant calligraphy, her full name, Carol Howard North, written in flowing script across the front. The return address made her hands tremble: Mrs. Charles Sophie North, New York. For a moment, Carol simply stared at the envelope as if it were a venomous snake coiled on her doorstep. In 8 years, she had received no contact from her former life. No calls, no letters, no attempts at communication from the man who had once promised to love her forever. She had begun to believe that chapter of her life was truly closed, that the wounds had healed enough to let her move forward. But here was proof that the past was never really past, that some wounds never stopped bleeding completely. With shaking fingers, Carol tore open the envelope and pulled out the contents. A wedding invitation embossed in gold fell into her palm like a stone. Mrs. Charles Sophie North requests the honor of your presence at the marriage of her son, Rennie Alexander North, to Miss Elena Catherine Hartwell. Saturday, the 15th of June, at 4 o'clock in the afternoon. 6th, Patrick's Cathedral. New York City. Carol's knees buckled and she had to grab the doorframe to keep from falling. The invitation fluttered from her nerveless fingers to the floor, where it lay like an accusation against the warm morning sunlight. Rennie was getting married to someone else, to a woman whose name Carol didn't recognize, whose face she couldn't imagine, whose existence felt like a dagger through the heart she thought had finally healed. "Mummy?" Ryan's voice came from the top of the stairs, filled with concern. "Are you okay? You look funny." Carol forced herself to straighten, to plaster a smile on her face, even as her world tilted on its axis. "I'm fine, sweetheart. Just thinking about something." But as the boys thundered down the stairs with their backpacks and lunch boxes, their faces bright with the anticipation of another day, Carol's mind was reeling. Why would Charles Sophie send her this? What possible reason could she have for wanting Carol to know about Rennie's wedding? The answer came with a second piece of paper that had been tucked behind the invitation, a brief note written in Charles Sophie's precise handwriting. My dear Carol, I thought you should know that Rennie has finally found real happiness with a woman who truly understands his world. Elena is everything a man like my son deserves, refined, educated, and from the proper background. They make such a beautiful couple. I do hope you'll consider attending. I know how much it would mean to see the life Rennie has built since putting the past behind him. With fondest regards, Charles Sophie North. The cruelty of it stole Carol's breath away. This wasn't an invitation, it was a final, devastating blow designed to destroy any remaining piece of her heart that still belonged to Rennie North. Charles Sophie wanted her to witness his happiness with another woman, wanted her to see him choosing someone else the way he had chosen to believe lies over love 8 years ago. "Mummy, what's that?" Riley asked, noticing the papers scattered on the floor. Carol quickly bent to gather them, but not before Ryan had glimpsed the elegant script. His reading had improved dramatically this year, and his face went pale as he made out the fateful words. Is that about our daddy?" Ryan whispered, his blue eyes, so achingly like Rennie's, wide with shock and dawning pain. Carol's heart shattered all over again. She had never hidden the boys' parentage from them, had always answered their questions honestly while protecting them from the painful details of why their father wasn't in their lives. But this was beyond anything she had prepared for. "Yes," she said softly, unable to lie to them. "It is." Riley's face crumpled and tears began to spill down his cheeks. "Daddy's getting married? To someone who isn't you? But we thought," Ryan's voice broke on the words, "we thought maybe someday he would come find us and we could be a real family." Carol gathered both boys in her arms, their tears soaking through her shirt as they clung to her with desperate hands. Her own tears fell freely now, mingling with theirs as they mourned the death of a dream none of them had been brave enough to speak aloud. "I'm sorry," Carol whispered into their hair. "I'm so sorry, my darling boys." "Doesn't he want us?" Riley sobbed. "Doesn't he care that we exist?" The innocent question was like a knife through Carol's chest. How could she explain that their father didn't know they existed? How could she tell them that she had tried to share the news of their existence on the very night their world fell apart, but that his faith in her had already been poisoned beyond repair? "Your father doesn't know about you," Carol said gently, the truth finally spilling out. "When I left, I was going to tell him I was pregnant, but things happened, and I never got the chance." Both boys pulled back to stare at her with wide, tearful eyes. "He doesn't know we're real," Ryan whispered. "No, sweetheart, he doesn't." "Then we have to tell him," Riley said urgently, his child's logic cutting straight to the heart of the matter. "We have to go to the wedding and show him that we're his sons." "Oh, my loves," Carol said, her heart breaking anew at their innocent faith. "It's not that simple. Your father made choices 8 years ago. He believed things about me that weren't true, and he decided our marriage was over. Even if he knew about you, that might not change anything." "But it might," Ryan said, with the stubborn hope of childhood. "Maybe if he sees us, he'll remember that he loved you. Maybe he'll realize he made a mistake." Carol looked into their faces. Faces that were mirrors of the man she had never stopped loving, and felt something shift inside her chest. For 8 years, she had hidden from the past, had built a safe little world for herself and her sons, far from the pain of what had been lost. But maybe it was time to stop hiding. "Mummy," Riley said softly, taking her hand in his small one. "Don't you want Daddy to know about us?" The question hung in the air between them, simple and devastating in its honesty. Did she want Rennie to know about the sons he had never met? Did she want him to see what his choice had cost him? Did she want one last chance to look into his eyes and tell him the truth she had carried alone for 8 years? "Yes," she whispered. The word, torn from the depths of her soul. "Yes, I do." The decision formed slowly, painfully, like a flower blooming in winter. Carol would go to this wedding, not to disrupt it, not to cause a scene, but to give her sons the chance to see their father, to let Rennie North know that his children existed, that his legacy lived on in 2 beautiful boys who had his eyes and his smile and his gentle heart. If it destroyed her to watch him marry another woman, if it broke her heart all over again to see him happy without her, then so be it. Her boys deserved to know their father, and their father deserved to know that love had created something beautiful from the ashes of their broken marriage. "We're going to New York," Carol said quietly, and the boys' faces lit up with hope so bright it took her breath away. "Really?" Ryan breathed. "We're going to meet Daddy?" "We're going to meet Daddy," Carol confirmed, pulling them close again. "Whatever happens, whatever he chooses to do with the knowledge that you exist, you'll know that you were brave enough to try." As the boys hugged her with fierce joy, chattering excitedly about the trip and what they would say to their father, Carol closed her eyes and tried to prepare her heart for what was coming. In a few weeks, she would see Rennie North again, the man who had been her everything, the man who had destroyed her world, the man whose children she had raised in secret for 8 years. She would attend his wedding to another woman, and she would tell him the truth that should have been shared long ago. She would give him the choice he had never known he had, and then she would accept whatever he decided, even if it meant walking away empty-handed once again. But this time, she wouldn't be walking away alone. This time, she would have the satisfaction of knowing that love had won, even if only for a moment. Her boys would meet their father, and nothing, not Charles Sophie's cruelty, not 8 years of separation, not even Rennie's marriage to another woman, could take that away from them. The wedding invitation lay forgotten on the floor, but its message had been received loud and clear. Charles Sophie thought she was delivering a final blow, but instead, she had given Carol the push she needed to finally stop running from the past. It was time to go home. Chapter 7. The Shocking Return. St. Patrick's Cathedral stood magnificent in the afternoon sunlight, its Gothic spires reaching toward heaven like prayers made of stone. Inside, 300 of New York's elite had gathered to witness the union of Rennie North and Elena Hartwell, a marriage that was being hailed as the social event of the season, the perfect joining of 2 prominent families. At the altar, Rennie stood in his perfectly tailored black tuxedo, his hands clasped behind his back as he waited for his bride to appear. To the assembled guests, he looked every inch the successful groom, handsome, composed, ready to embark on the next chapter of his carefully orchestrated life. But inside, his heart felt like a barren wasteland, empty and aching with a longing he couldn't name. As the organ began to play the traditional wedding march, Rennie's thoughts drifted, as they inevitably did, to another wedding 8 years ago. He remembered Carol walking down the aisle toward him in a simple white dress that had made her look like an angel, her face radiant with joy and love so pure it had stolen his breath. He remembered the vows they had written themselves, the promises whispered through tears of happiness, the way she had looked at him as if he were her entire universe. The memory was so vivid, so painfully real, that for a moment Rennie could almost see her standing at the back of the cathedral, her honey-colored eyes shining with love. But it wasn't a memory. It wasn't his imagination playing cruel tricks on his desperate heart. Carol Howard was standing at the entrance to St. Patrick's Cathedral, and she wasn't alone. The entire congregation seemed to freeze, as if time itself had stopped. Conversations died mid-sentence, heads turned in unison, and a collective gasp rippled through the assembled guests. Because there, framed in the afternoon light streaming through the cathedral doors, stood the most impossible, wonderful, devastating sight any of them could have imagined. Carol looked exactly as Rennie remembered her, yet somehow even more beautiful. 8 years had refined her features, had given her a quiet strength that radiated from every line of her body. She wore a simple navy blue dress that hugged her curves elegantly, her dark hair flowing over her shoulders in soft waves. But it wasn't Carol alone that had caused the cathedral to fall into stunned silence. Beside her, their small hands trustingly clasped in hers, stood 2 8-year-old boys who were unmistakably, undeniably Rennie North's sons. The resemblance was so strong it was breathtaking. Both boys had Rennie's dark hair, though Ryan's was slightly curlier like his mother's, and Riley's fell across his forehead in exactly the same way Rennie's did when he was nervous. They had his deep blue eyes, his strong jawline, even his way of standing with one shoulder slightly higher than the other. But most shocking of all, they had his smile, that gentle, slightly lopsided grin that had first captured Carol's heart all those years ago. At the altar, Rennie felt his knees buckle. His vision blurred, and for a terrifying moment he thought he might actually faint in front of 300 witnesses. The priest was saying something. Elena was touching his arm in concern, but all Rennie could see were those 2 little faces staring at him with a mixture of hope and nervous anticipation. "Oh my God," he whispered, the words torn from his throat like a prayer. "Oh my God." The boys, his sons because there was no denying what they were, looked around the cathedral with wide eyes, taking in the soaring arches, the stained glass windows, the sea of shocked faces turned toward them. But their gaze kept returning to the man at the altar, their father, whose face had gone white with shock and recognition. "Is that him?" Riley whispered to his mother, loud enough that the first few pews could hear. "Is that our daddy?" Carol's voice, when she answered, carried clearly through the shocked silence of the cathedral. "Yes, sweetheart, that's your father." The simple words hit Rennie like a physical blow. Father. He was a father, had been a father for 8 years without knowing it. These beautiful boys, these perfect children who carried his features and Carol's grace, were his sons. Elena, still standing beside him in her elaborate white gown, followed his gaze to the back of the cathedral and immediately understood what was happening. Her face cycled through confusion, realization, and then cold fury as she realized her perfect wedding was being destroyed by the sudden appearance of her groom's secret family. "Rennie," she hissed under her breath, her voice sharp with barely contained rage. "What is the meaning of this?" But Rennie couldn't answer. He couldn't think, couldn't breathe, couldn't process anything beyond the devastating truth standing at the back of the cathedral. Carol had been pregnant when she left. She had been carrying his children, twins, and he had thrown her out of his life without ever knowing. In the pews, Charles Sophie sat frozen in horror, her face a mask of shock and growing panic. This wasn't supposed to happen. Carol was supposed to see the wedding and be devastated by it, not show up with those children who looked so much like Rennie that even a blind person could see the truth. The cathedral remained suspended in shocked silence as Carol began to walk down the aisle, her sons beside her. It was the most surreal procession anyone had ever witnessed. Not a bride walking toward her groom, but an ex-wife walking toward the man who had destroyed her life, bringing with her the children he had never known existed. With each step, Rennie could see more details that confirmed what his heart already knew. Ryan had his mother's gentleness, but his own determined chin. Riley had Carol's graceful way of moving, but Rennie's habit of running his hand through his hair when he was nervous. They were perfect, beautiful children who should have been in his life from the very beginning. "Stop," Elena commanded suddenly, her voice cutting through the cathedral like a whip. "Stop this immediately. This is my wedding, and I will not have it ruined by my children." Rennie's voice was barely a whisper, but it carried throughout the cathedral with devastating clarity. "By my sons?" The admission hung in the air like a confession, and the remaining pretense that this was anything other than a complete catastrophe crumbled completely. Guests began to whisper frantically among themselves. Cameras flashed as society photographers captured what would surely become the scandal of the decade, and Elena's carefully planned wedding dissolved into chaos. Carol had reached the front of the cathedral now, close enough that Rennie could see the pain and strength warring in her honey-colored eyes. Close enough that he could see how his sons fidgeted nervously, but stood proud beside their mother, their small hands still clasped in hers like anchors. "Hello, Rennie," Carol said softly, her voice carrying the weight of 8 years of separation and sorrow. Carol. Her name was a broken prayer on his lips. When 8 years ago, she said simply. "I was pregnant when I left. I was going to tell you that night, but..." She gestured helplessly, encompassing all the pain and betrayal and heartbreak that had driven her from his life. Rennie's gaze dropped to the boys, and he felt his heart shatter completely as he took in every detail of their faces. They were staring at him with undisguised curiosity and hope. These sons he had never held, never rocked to sleep, never taught to ride a bike or helped with homework. "What are your names?" he asked, his voice breaking on the words. "I'm Ryan," the slightly taller twin said bravely, his voice small but clear in the vast cathedral. "And this is my brother Riley. We're 8 years old." 8 years old, Rennie repeated wonderfully, the words tasting like ashes in his mouth. 8 years of bedtime stories he had never read. 8 years of birthdays he had never celebrated. 8 years of love he had never been able to give. "Daddy," Riley said tentatively, the word hitting Rennie like a lightning bolt. "Mommy told us you didn't know about us. Are you happy to meet us?" The simple, innocent question destroyed what was left of Rennie's composure. He sank to his knees, right there at the altar, tears streaming down his face as he reached out toward these children, who should have been his whole world. "Happy?" he whispered through his tears. "Oh my God, yes, I'm happy to meet you. I'm so sorry I didn't know. I'm so sorry I wasn't there." Both boys looked at their mother uncertainly, and Carol nodded encouragingly. They released her hands and took tentative steps toward their father, their faces bright with wonder and nervous joy. "We thought about you every day," Ryan said seriously. "Mommy told us stories about a prince who lost his way, and we always hoped you would find your way back to us." Riley nodded earnestly. "We drew pictures of you and put them on our wall. Do you want to see them sometime?" Rennie was sobbing openly now, his perfectly planned wedding forgotten, his composed facade shattered completely. "Yes," he managed to say. "Yes, I want to see everything. I want to know everything about you." Behind him, Elena stood frozen in her wedding dress, her face a mask of humiliation and rage. Around them, the cathedral buzzed with shocked whispers and frantic activity as photographers captured every moment of the most spectacular wedding disaster in New York history. But Rennie was aware of none of it. His entire universe had narrowed to the 3 people standing before him, the woman he had never stopped loving and the sons he had never known existed. The family he had destroyed with his doubt and pride and blindness. As Ryan and Riley finally reached him, their small arms wrapping around his neck in tentative hugs, Rennie felt his carefully constructed life crumble around him. 8 years too late, he was finally meeting his children. 8 years too late, he was realizing the magnitude of what his mother's lies had cost him. The fairy tale he had thrown away was standing right in front of him, and for the first time in 8 years, Rennie North's broken heart began to beat. with something that felt almost like hope. Chapter 8. The truth unravels. The cathedral had descended into complete chaos. Photographers pushed forward to capture every moment of the most scandalous wedding disaster in New York society's recent memory, while guests whispered frantically among themselves, their voices creating a symphony of speculation that echoed off the soaring stone walls. But at the altar, time seemed suspended as Rennie knelt on the cold marble floor, his arms wrapped around two sons he was meeting for the first time. Riley pulled back slightly from their embrace, his small hands framing Rennie's face with the innocent directness that only children possess. His blue eyes, so startlingly similar to his father's, searched Rennie's face with wonder and heartbreaking hope. "Are you really our daddy?" he asked, his voice trembling with raw emotion. "Mommy cries about you every night when she thinks we're asleep. She looks at pictures of you and whispers your name like it hurts her." The words hit Rennie like physical blows, each one more devastating than the last. Carol still had pictures of him. She still cried for him after 8 years. While he had been torturing himself with memories of their lost love, she had been raising their children alone, mourning the family that should have been. "Yes," Rennie whispered, his voice broken with tears. "Yes, I'm your daddy, and I'm so sorry, so incredibly sorry that I wasn't there for you." Ryan, the more serious of the twins, studied his father's face with an intensity that reminded everyone, watching of Rennie's own thoughtful nature. "Mommy said you made a mistake, that you believed lies about her instead of remembering how much you loved each other." The simple, devastating truth from the mouth of a child silenced the remaining whispers. In the cathedral, every eye turned to Charles Sophie, who sat rigidly in the front pew, her face a mask of barely controlled panic as her carefully constructed world began to crumble around her. "That's right," Rennie said, his gaze finding his mother's face with dawning horror and rage. "I believed lies, terrible, poisonous lies that cost me everything I ever loved." Elena, who had been standing frozen beside the altar in her elaborate wedding gown, finally found her voice. Her face was white with humiliation and fury, her carefully applied makeup streaking with tears of rage. "This is insane," she said, her voice sharp and cutting. "Rennie, you can't possibly believe that this woman can just waltz in here and claim, 'They're my sons,'" Rennie said firmly, rising to his feet but keeping his hands on the boy's shoulders. "Look at them, Elena. Anyone with eyes can see they're my sons." The truth was undeniable. Ryan and Riley North stood like living proof of their parentage, their features such perfect blends of their parents that even the most skeptical observer couldn't question their identity. Elena's gaze swept over the twins with undisguised dismay, then fixed on Carol with venomous hatred. "You," she spat. "You planned this. You deliberately chose my wedding day to create this spectacle." "I didn't plan this," Carol said quietly, her voice carrying clearly through the cathedral despite its gentleness. "I came because your future mother-in-law invited me. She wanted me to see Rennie's happiness with someone else." All eyes turned to Charles Sophie, who looked as if she might be physically sick. The elegant woman, who had always prided herself on controlling every situation, had lost control completely, and she knew it. "You invited her?" Elena turned on the older woman with fury. "You invited his ex-wife to our wedding?" I thought," Charles Sophie stammered, her usual poise deserting her completely. "I never expected. There were no children 8 years ago. There was no indication, because I never got the chance to tell him," Carol said, her voice gaining strength as the truth finally poured out. "The night I was going to share the news about my pregnancy, the night I had prepared a romantic dinner and bought baby clothes and taken a picture of the ultrasound to show him, that was the night you orchestrated your final lie." The night you set up that scene with Richard Pemberton. Rennie's face went ashen as the memory crashed over him with devastating clarity. The romantic preparations he had dismissed as Carol's attempt to manipulate him. The rose petals and candles he had seen as props in her supposed deception. She had been planning to tell him about their children, and he had destroyed their marriage instead. "Oh God," he whispered. "Carol, oh God, what did I do?" "You chose to believe the worst of me instead of trusting in our love," Carol said, tears streaming down her face now. "You handed me divorce papers on the night I was going to tell you that you were going to be a father." The cathedral was completely silent now, except for the sound of Carol's quiet sobs and Rennie's harsh breathing as the full magnitude of his mistake crashed over him. Riley tugged on his father's sleeve, his young face crumpled with confusion and pain. "Daddy, why didn't you want us?" The innocent question shattered what remained of Rennie's composure. He dropped to his knees again, gathering both boys in his arms as he sobbed openly. "I did want you," he said fiercely. "I wanted you so much. I just didn't know you existed. If I had known, nothing in this world could have kept me away from you. Why didn't Mommy tell you?" Ryan asked, his own tears starting to fall. Carol knelt beside them, completing the family circle that should have formed 8 years ago. "Because when I tried to tell him, he was so angry with me, so convinced that I was a liar, that I knew he wouldn't believe me. I thought if I told him about you, he might try to take you away from me just to hurt me more. I would never..." Rennie started, then stopped as he realized the truth. 8 years ago, in his rage and pain and blindness, he might have done exactly that. He might have used their children as weapons in his wounded pride. "I know you wouldn't now," Carol said softly. "But then you weren't yourself. You were your mother's son, not the man I fell in love with." Every eye in the cathedral turned to Charles Sophie, who was now visibly trembling. The web of lies and manipulation she had spent 8 years congratulating herself on was unraveling thread by thread, and there was nothing she could do to stop it. Elena, who had been listening to this exchange with growing horror and realization, slowly reached up and removed her wedding veil. The delicate lace fell to the marble floor like a surrendered flag. "I won't be a part of this," she said coldly. "I won't marry a man who's clearly still in love with another woman, a man who has children he's never mentioned to me. This entire relationship has been a lie." She turned to Charles Sophie with fury blazing in her eyes. "You told me he was over her. You told me she meant nothing to him anymore. You manipulated both of us." "Elena, please," Charles Sophie began, but Elena cut her off with a gesture. "Save it," Elena said bitterly. "I've just realized that I've been nothing more than a pawn in your sick game. You never wanted Rennie to be happy. You just wanted to control him." With that, Elena North that never was gathered her skirts and walked out of the cathedral, her head held high despite the humiliation. The assembled guests watched her go with a mixture of sympathy and fascination, many of them beginning to realize they were witnessing the exposure of a family scandal that had been 8 years in the making. Rennie didn't even notice her departure. His entire focus was on the woman and children before him, on the family he had lost and found again in the space of a single afternoon. "Tell me," he whispered to Carol. "Tell me everything. Tell me about their first words, their first steps. Tell me about every birthday I missed, every Christmas, every moment of their lives." Carol's voice broke as she began to speak, the words pouring out like water from a dam. "Ryan said Dada first, even though you weren't there. He was 7 months old, and he kept saying it over and over like he knew someone was missing. Riley walked at 10 months. He was always the more adventurous one. He climbed out of his crib and scared me half to death." Rennie hung on every word, tears streaming down his face as he learned about the life his sons had lived without him. "They ask about you constantly. Carol continued. They want to know if you like football, if you can swim, if you would read them bedtime stories. I've been telling them about you their whole lives, trying to keep your memory alive, even though you thought I had abandoned them, Rennie finished. No, Carol said firmly. Even though I knew you didn't know they existed. I always believed that if you knew about them, you would love them. I just never thought I'd get the chance to find out if I was right. Ryan looked up at his father with shining eyes. Do you love us, Daddy? More than my own life, Rennie said without hesitation. From this moment forward, you and your brother and your mother are the most important things in my world. As the family held each other in the ruins of a wedding that was never meant to be, Charles Sophie sat alone in her pew, finally understanding that her victory had been a hollow one. She had destroyed her son's happiness, robbed herself of grandchildren, and created a wasteland where a garden of love should have grown. The truth had finally come out, and there was no force on earth that could put the lies back together again. Chapter 9. Facing the Past. The cathedral had finally emptied of shocked guests and photographers, leaving only the broken remnants of what should have been a celebration. Wedding flowers lay scattered across the marble floor, abandoned programs and tissue boxes evidence of the chaos that had unfolded. In the sudden quiet, Rennie stood with his hand on each twin's shoulder, his eyes fixed on his mother with a fury so cold it could have frozen fire. Charles Sophie sat alone in the front pew, her carefully composed mask finally completely shattered. For the first time in her 62 years, she looked her age, perhaps older. Her silver hair had come loose from its perfect chignon. Her makeup was smeared, and her hands shook as she clutched her purse like a shield. Get them out of here, Rennie said quietly to Carol, his voice deadly calm. Take the boys somewhere safe. What I have to say to my mother isn't fit for children's ears. Carol's protective instincts flared immediately. She had spent 8 years shielding her sons from pain, and the last thing she wanted was for them to witness their father's rage, justified though it might be. Come on, my darlings, she said gently, taking their hands. Let's wait outside while Daddy talks to his mother. But we just found him, Riley protested, his small fingers tightening around Rennie's. What if he disappears again? The innocent fear in his son's voice nearly broke Rennie's heart all over again. He knelt down to look both boys in the eyes, his voice gentle despite the rage burning in his chest. I will never disappear again, he promised solemnly. No matter what happens, no matter what anyone says or does, I will always be your father. Do you understand me? Both boys nodded, though Ryan's expression remained worried. You promise? I promise on my life, Rennie said, pressing a kiss to each of their foreheads. Now go with your mother. I'll find you in a few minutes, and then we're going to talk about everything, about your life in Australia, about what you like to do, about how we can be a family. Carol led the boys toward the cathedral doors, but not before shooting a warning glance at Rennie. Her message was clear. Whatever he said to his mother, the boys' well-being came first. They had already been through enough trauma for one day. When the massive doors closed behind them, Rennie turned back to face the woman who had destroyed everything he had ever loved. The silence stretched between them, heavy with 8 years of lies and manipulation and pain. Well, Rennie said finally, his voice echoing in the empty cathedral, aren't you going to congratulate me on finding my sons? Aren't you going to express your joy at discovering you have 2 grandchildren you've never met? Charles Sophie's hands trembled harder, but when she lifted her chin, her eyes still held traces of the cold determination that had driven her to such desperate measures. They're not your sons, she said quietly. Not really. Children need stable homes, proper upbringings. Look what she's done. Raised them on the other side of the world, filled their heads with fantasies about a father who didn't even know they existed. The words were so breathtakingly cruel, so completely devoid of any recognition of her own role in creating this situation, that Rennie could only stare at her in shock. "They are my sons," he said slowly, dangerously. "They have my eyes, my smile, my blood running through their veins, and the only reason I didn't know they existed is because of you. I saved you. You destroyed me." Rennie's voice exploded through the cathedral, his control finally snapping. "You destroyed my marriage, robbed me of 8 years with my children, and turned me into a man I despise." Charles Sophie flinched, but held her ground. "I protected you from making the biggest mistake of your life. That woman never belonged in our world." "Our world?" Rennie laughed bitterly. "You mean your world of lies and manipulation and poison? A world where love doesn't matter? Where happiness is sacrificed for social status and bloodlines? A world where you would have been respected, where your children would have been raised with proper values. My children were raised by a woman who loved them enough to sacrifice her own happiness for theirs." Rennie's voice thundered through the cathedral. "They were raised with kindness and honesty and unconditional love, everything you never gave me." The accusation hung in the air between them, years of suppressed truth finally spoken aloud. "Charles." Sophie's face went white, but her eyes hardened with defensive anger. "I gave you everything," she said coldly. "I raised you alone after your father died. I built this life for you, created opportunities. You created a prison." Rennie cut her off. "You poisoned every relationship I ever had, drove away every woman who might have made me happy. And when I finally found someone who loved me for who I really was, you destroyed that too. She wasn't right for you. She was perfect for me." Rennie's voice cracked with 8 years of suppressed grief. "She loved me. She made me laugh, made me feel alive, made me want to be a better man. And you couldn't stand it, could you? You couldn't stand that someone else made me happy." Charles Sophie's mask slipped completely, revealing the bitter, jealous woman she had always been underneath the elegant facade. "She took you away from me," she whispered, her voice raw with pain and possessiveness. "You stopped needing me. You stopped coming to me for advice, stopped letting me plan your life. She made you weak." "She made me human," Rennie said quietly. "And you hated her for it." For a long moment they stared at each other across the wreckage of their relationship. Then Charles Sophie straightened, gathering the last remnants of her dignity around her like armor. "Fine," she said coldly. "Go back to her, ruin your life chasing after a fantasy. But don't come crying to me when it all falls apart again." "It won't fall apart," Rennie said with quiet certainty. "Because this time I know the truth. I know what you are, what you've always been, and I'm done letting you poison my life." He turned toward the cathedral doors, then paused without looking back. "Don't contact me again," he said simply. "Don't call, don't write, don't show up at my office or my home. As far as I'm concerned, I no longer have a mother." The words hit Charles Sophie like physical blows, and for the first time real fear crept into her eyes. "Rennie, you can't mean that. I'm your family." "My family is waiting for me outside," Rennie said. "Carol and Ryan and Riley, the family you stole from me 8 years ago." He walked away without another word, leaving Charles Sophie alone in the empty cathedral with the consequences of her choices. Outside, Rennie found Carol sitting on the cathedral steps with the twins, their small heads leaning against her shoulders, as she pointed out various architectural details of the building. They looked so peaceful, so complete as a unit, that for a moment Rennie wondered if he had any right to disrupt the life they had built without him. Carol looked up as he approached, her eyes searching his face for signs of the confrontation that had just taken place. "Is everything all right?" she asked quietly. "It will be," Rennie said, settling on the step beside them. "Eventually." Ryan and Riley immediately scooted closer to their father, their natural affection breaking through any lingering awkwardness. "Daddy," Riley said seriously, "can we go get ice cream?" Mommy always says ice cream makes everything better. The simple request, so normal and childlike after the emotional devastation of the afternoon, made Rennie smile for the first time since Carol had walked back into his life. "I think ice cream sounds perfect," he said, looking at Carol hopefully, "if it's all right with your mother." Carol studied his face, seeing the exhaustion and pain, but also something else. A hope that hadn't been there 8 years ago, a determination to do better this time. "Ice cream sounds nice," she said carefully. "But Rennie, we need to talk, really talk, about what this means, about what happens next." "I know," he said quietly, "and I know I have no right to expect anything from you. I know I hurt you in ways I can't even comprehend, and I know trust isn't something that can be rebuilt overnight." Carol's eyes filled with tears at the simple acknowledgement of her pain. 8 years of raising their children alone, 8 years of bedtime stories about princes who lost their way, 8 years of wondering if she had made the right choice in leaving instead of fighting for their marriage. "You did hurt me," she said softly, "more than I ever thought it was possible to hurt, and I'm terrified of letting you hurt our boys the way you hurt me." The honesty was brutal but necessary, and Rennie accepted it without defensiveness. "I understand," he said. "All I'm asking for is a chance to prove that I'm not the man I was 8 years ago, that I can be the father they deserve and maybe someday earn your forgiveness." Carol looked into his eyes, those blue eyes that her sons had inherited, eyes that had once looked at her with such love and later with such betrayal, and saw something she hadn't expected: humility, genuine remorse, and underneath it all, the man she had fallen in love with all those years ago. "One day at a time," she said finally. "We'll take this one day at a time." It wasn't a declaration of love or forgiveness. It wasn't a promise of reconciliation. But it was hope, fragile and tentative but real. As they walked toward the ice cream shop with their sons between them, Rennie allowed himself to believe that maybe, just maybe, love could find a way to heal even the deepest wounds. But Carol's heart remained guarded, protected by walls built from 8 years of pain and single motherhood. She would let him know his sons, would give him the chance to be their father. Whether she could ever trust him with her heart again remained to be seen. Chapter 10. Love Reborn. 3 months later, the small apartment Carol had rented in Manhattan was filled with the sound of boyish laughter and the warm aroma of chocolate chip cookies baking in the oven. She had decided to stay in New York after the wedding disaster, partly to give Rennie time with his sons, but mostly because seeing him again had awakened feelings she thought were buried forever. Carol stood at the kitchen window, watching as Rennie played soccer with Ryan and Riley in the small courtyard behind the building. 3 months of shared custody had transformed all of them. The boys had gained the father they had always dreamed of, and Rennie had discovered a depth of love he never knew existed. But Carol herself remained carefully guarded, her heart protected by walls that 8 years of pain had built brick by brick. She watched as Rennie scooped Riley up in his arms after the boy had scored a goal, spinning him around while Ryan cheered. The sight made her chest tight with longing and fear in equal measure. This was the man she had fallen in love with, playful, devoted, completely present with his children. But it was also the man who had believed the worst of her when it mattered most. A soft knock at the door interrupted her thoughts. Carol opened it to find Rennie standing there with his arms full of white roses, her favorites, though she had never told him she still loved them. "These are from the boys," he said with that lopsided smile that still made her heart skip beats. "They insisted that bringing mommy flowers would help with their plan." "Their plan?" Carol asked, accepting the roses with hands that trembled slightly. "Operation Get Mommy and Daddy Together?" Rennie said seriously, though his eyes sparkled with affection. They've been very secretive about it, but I think it involves dinner, candlelight, and Ryan's attempts at violin music. Despite herself, Carol laughed. The boys had been, not so subtly, trying to orchestrate romantic moments between their parents for weeks. Everything from accidentally locking them in the supply closet at Ryan's school to insisting that family movie nights required cuddling on the couch. "They're persistent," she said softly. "They get that from their mother," Rennie replied, his voice gentle. "Carol, can we talk? Really talk?" Over the past 3 months, Rennie had been the perfect gentleman, respectful of her boundaries, patient with her hesitation, never pushing for more than she was willing to give. But she could see in his eyes that his patience was born of desperation, not indifference. He was a man fighting for his life, for his family, for the love he had thrown away 8 years ago. Carol nodded, leading him to the small balcony overlooking the courtyard where the boys were now drawing pictures with sidewalk chalk. They sat side by side on the wrought iron chairs, the evening air warm around them. "I remember everything," Rennie said quietly, his eyes fixed on their sons below. "I remember how you hummed while you cooked. Always slightly off key, but it was the most beautiful sound in the world to me. I remember how you laughed at old movies, even when you'd seen them a dozen times. I remember the way you picked roses from our garden every morning and put them in that blue vase on the kitchen table." Carol's breath caught. He did remember every small detail of their life together, every little thing that had made their love unique and precious. "I remember how you looked at me," Rennie continued, his voice growing rough with emotion. "Like I was everything good in your world. Like I was worthy of the love you gave me so freely." "You were," Carol whispered, tears starting to fall. "You were everything to me, and I threw it away." Rennie turned to face her fully, his blue eyes bright with unshed tears. "I threw away the most precious thing I've ever had because I let fear and doubt poison my mind, because I chose to believe lies instead of trusting in the love we had built together." "Rennie, no, let me finish, please." He reached for her hands, and this time she didn't pull away. "I know I don't deserve another chance. I know I hurt you in ways that can't be undone. But Carol, I love you. I have loved you every single day for the past 8 years, even when I was too proud and too blind to admit it. You and our boys are my entire world, and I will spend the rest of my life proving that to you, if you'll let me." Before Carol could respond, the sound of angry voices from the building's entrance drew their attention. Charles Sophie North was arguing with the doorman, her voice sharp with entitlement and fury. "I don't care what she told you," Charles Sophie was saying. "I am Mrs. North, and I demand to see my son immediately." Carol felt her blood run cold. In the 3 months since the cathedral disaster, Charles Sophie had made several attempts to contact Rennie, all of which he had firmly rebuffed. But this was the first time she had come to Carol's apartment, and her presence felt like a dark cloud threatening to destroy the fragile peace they had been building. Rennie was on his feet immediately, his entire demeanor changing from tender suitor to fierce protector. "Stay here," he told Carol. "I'll handle this." But Carol stood as well, surprising him with her sudden strength. "No," she said firmly, "we handle this together, as a family." They made their way downstairs to find Charles Sophie in the lobby, her face twisted with the same bitter fury that had driven her to destroy their marriage 8 years ago. She looked older, more fragile than Carol remembered, but her eyes still burned with malevolent determination. "There you are," Charles Sophie said to Rennie, completely ignoring Carol's presence. "I've been trying to reach you for months. This nonsense has gone on long enough." "It's not nonsense," Rennie said coldly. "It's my life, my family." "Your family is with me," Charles Sophie snapped. "Not with this woman who poisoned you against your own mother." Carol felt the familiar twist of pain at the cruel words, but this time she didn't shrink away. This time she had something to fight for, not just herself, but her sons and the family they were slowly rebuilding. I never said a word against. You to Rennie, Carol said quietly. Your own actions destroyed your relationship with your son. Charles Sophie's face contorted with rage. You destroyed everything. You came back with those children, those illegitimate... Don't. Rennie's voice was deadly quiet, but it cut through Charles Sophie's vitriol like a sword. Don't you dare speak about my sons that way. They're not your sons, Charles Sophie screamed, her careful facade finally cracking completely. She probably doesn't even know who their real father is. Look at them. They could be anyone's children. The words hung in the air like a poison cloud, and for a moment, Carol felt the old doubts creeping in. Would Rennie believe her? Would he choose his mother's lies over the truth once again? But then, Rennie stepped forward, placing himself between Charles Sophie and Carol with the protective stance of a man defending everything he held dear. Those boys are my sons, he said with quiet certainty. They have my eyes, my smile, my stubborn streak, and my mother's musical laugh that I inherited from my grandmother. They are the best parts of me and Carol combined, and they are the greatest. Blessing of my life. He turned to look at Carol, his eyes blazing with love and determination. And their mother is the woman I should have defended 8 years ago, the woman I should have trusted above all others, the woman I choose now and will choose every day for the rest of my life. Charles Sophie stared at them in shock. Finally, understanding that she had lost, her son had made his choice, and it wasn't her. You'll regret this, she said venomously. When this all falls apart again, don't come crawling back to me. It won't fall apart, Rennie said with absolute conviction, because this time I know the difference between love and manipulation. This time I choose love. With that, Charles Sophie North walked out of their lives forever, her final attempt at destruction having only served to strengthen the bond between the family she had tried so hard to tear apart. In the silence that followed, Carol stared at Rennie with wonder and growing hope. He had chosen her, publicly, definitively, without hesitation or doubt. He had chosen their family over the woman who had raised him, chosen love over fear, chosen truth over lies. Carol, Rennie said softly, reaching for her hands. I know I have no right to ask this. I know I don't deserve it, but will you marry me? Again? Will you let me be your husband and our boy's father, officially and forever? Carol looked into his eyes, those blue eyes that had once looked at her with such love, then such betrayal, and now such fierce devotion, and felt the last of her walls crumble. Yes, she whispered, and then louder, with joy bubbling up from the depths of her soul. Yes! Rennie swept her into his arms, spinning her around the lobby as tears of happiness streamed down both their faces. When he finally set her down, their lips met in a kiss that was 8 years in the making, passionate, desperate, full of all the love and longing and forgiveness that had brought them back together. Mommy, Daddy, the boys' voices echoed from the courtyard as they came running inside, having witnessed the entire scene from the window. Did Daddy ask you to marry him? Did you say yes? I said yes. Carol laughed through her tears as Ryan and Riley tackled them both in an exuberant group hug. We're going to be a real family. 6 months later, the small chapel overlooking Sydney Harbour was decorated with white roses and filled with the soft sound of waves against the shore. This time, there were no society photographers, no hundreds of guests, no elaborate ceremonies designed to impress. There were only the people who mattered most. A handful of close friends Carol had made in Australia, the minister who had baptized the twins, and most importantly, 2 8-year-old boys who served as both ring bearers and witnesses to their parents' love. Carol walked down the aisle in a simple white dress that flowed around her like sea foam, her face radiant with joy and certainty. Rennie waited for her at the altar, his eyes never leaving her face as she approached. This time, there would be no interruptions, no last-minute disasters, no poisonous lies to destroy their happiness. "Dearly beloved," the minister began, but Ryan interrupted with the serious tone of a child performing an important duty. "Before you start," he said loudly, "we want to say something." Riley nodded solemnly and stepped forward. "Mommy and Daddy, we're really happy you're getting married. We've been waiting our whole lives for this." "We promise to be the best sons ever," Ryan added. "And we promise to help you remember how much you love each other every single day." There wasn't a dry eye in the small chapel as Rennie and Carol exchanged vows they had written themselves. Promises of trust, of faith, of love that would endure any storm. When they kissed as husband and wife for the